So, starting time, and welcome everyone to the Americas panel of the One Under One Sky Conference. It's very good to have all of you here. My name is Mariana. I'm a dark sky advocate from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, but I am currently a hopefully physics major in college. I go to school in Carleton College in Minnesota. I've been with Dark Sky for about 2 years now. It's my second time participating in the conference, and I'm really excited. It's always one of my favorite dark sky moments of the year. So I hope all of you enjoy it as much as I do. I was supposed to ask all of you to say hello and say where you're from in chat, but I see that all of you are very used to the conference by now and have already done that. If you haven't, please let us know where you're tuning in from. I would also like to let everyone know that there's a live transcript, so like captioning. And if you need translation, it's readily available. You can find it in the toolbar right beneath you at the bottom of the webinar screen. I'd also like to remind everyone about the code of conduct. We have Dark Sky staff looking through the chat and the Q&A section. Also, we have both Q&A and chat options. So please use the Q&A function for questions you have for the panelists. We'll have a 20-minute Q&A after all three speakers have spoken. So if you have any questions for them, let us know. And the chat is for discussion. Feel free to talk. Feel free to let us know your thoughts. And basically a short overview of this section. We have three speakers, which each will give a presentation of up to 20 minutes. And then we'll have a moderated Q&A after all of them have presented. And following this session, we'll have a short bio break, and then we have engagement workshops and sessions, which you will be able to access through your activity hub. Okay, so let's jump right into our first theme. Our first speaker is Ida Mohammed. He's the president of the Caribbean Institute of Astronomy. He's an engineer, astrophotographer, and astronomy educator based in Trinidad and Tobago. He also serves as the regional coordinator for Astronomers Without Borders, so a great person to hear from. And now pass the microphone to him.
Thank you. Thank you also very much. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. And I'm so very happy to be here as part of the Dark Sky Under One Sky conference. So let me share my screen. Right. And if you guys could give me a quick thumbs up if you're seeing everything okay. Yep. Excellent. Okay. So my name is Isa Mohammed, and I'm from a little place called Trinidad and Tobago, way out in the southern Caribbean islands. And I'm part of an organization called the Caribbean Institute of Astronomy. And, we set ourselves the lofty goal of developing the growth and development of astronomy throughout the Caribbean. And I'm an astrophotographer, so this is some of my work, but we could just skip this all very quickly. And the work that we do out in the Caribbean is informal education, outreach, telescope viewing, workshops, lectures, the full works. And while we are based primarily in Trinidad and Tobago, we do activities throughout the islands. And when you say the word Caribbean, I think this is the sort of thing that people think. This is a picture I took just across on our sister island of Tobago, and it's your sun, sand, and beautiful sea, and what everybody thinks with the word Caribbean. Now, when I'm using the word Caribbean here, I'm going to be speaking in a very specific context, which is the English-speaking Caribbean. And you could see here the territories that are identified as English-speaking. And, it's because they share a certain cultural similarity. Guyana, off on the bottom right-hand corner, is not even touching the Caribbean Ocean per se, the Caribbean Sea. But it's culturally similar based on our, history and language and that sort of thing. So this is the English-speaking Caribbean that we operate within. And as you could see, it's a whole bunch of islands and territories spread out over a vast area. And each of these is comparatively small. And that's when we get into the challenges, we'll speak a little bit about that. Now, people might think that the Caribbean is a wonderful place for astronomy, and I'm going to mention a few things here about the Caribbean. We're way down in the south, close to the equator, so we could see both the northern and the southern skies. We have fantastic astronomical seeing. So you have photographers like Damien Peach. He's regarded as one of the top planetary photographers in the world, and he does his shooting from Barbados because of how steady the atmosphere is, because of the trade winds creating a laminar flow over the islands. We have nice warm weather. You don't have winter to worry about. We have stable temperatures, so we don't have to cool down our telescopes and deal with changing focus throughout the night and all these things. And of course, the planets pass directly overhead, so we get great viewing of them. But for all these things, there are some challenges and there are some problems. And one of the things people might think is the Caribbean islands would necessarily have low light pollution. And it's really not necessarily the case. And in fact, there is a distinct problem when you're dealing with light pollution on a small island. Now, this is a light pollution map for our region, and this is based on 2022 data. It's light pollution atlas computed from satellite data. It's not perfect, but it's what we have. And you could see on the islands the amount of light pollution that you're really dealing with. One of the things we could do with the satellite data is we could see what the trend was, and in this case from 2013 to 2022. And I'm going to be using a few of these maps to make some specific points. And what this map shows, and I want you all to think, the areas that are reddish, orangish, the areas where light pollution has increased in the last 10 years. And the areas that are bluish, purplish, those are the areas where light pollution actually went down. And you think, well, I'm seeing a lot of blue on that map, right? That means the light pollution is getting better in certain places. It's not necessarily the case. And this is where I'm going to start getting into the diversity and the intricacies of the problems that we deal with in this region. So you see all this blue here, it's but primarily in Venezuela, and it's not because they have great nighttime conservation, and it's also not because they switched to LED fixtures, which is something that we'll get to speak about next. This is actually something different. Venezuela had an economic collapse. The oil production went off a cliff come 2015, and they have an energy crisis over the last 10 years with electricity, and they're under sanctions, and there are a lot of problems in the country. And that's primarily responsible for what you're seeing here, the reduction in oil production, the energy crisis, and all these things. And this is where you could start seeing that light pollution, strangely enough, could be an indicator of development or an indicator of a reverse in development. And this is one of the things we're going to see when we start digging into the islands. Just next door to Venezuela is one of our territories, Guyana. When I say our, I mean these are all independent. They're their own countries, but it's part of the English-speaking Caribbean, Guyana. It's one of the least populated areas in the world. It's a vast country with only 800,000 people. But it's a strict contrast to Venezuela in that they discovered oil a few years ago. And if you see the panel on the left versus the panel on the right, you can see out in the ocean, there's this big blob of light pollution. And that's from the oil drilling. Exxon is pumping millions of barrels a day out of that spot. And as a result, the country on the whole has gotten a lot more developed. And you could see the difference in the light pollution image on the left versus the center. And then on the right, where we see the trend, it's all orange. This is concerning because Guyana is one of those territories where we actually have true dark skies in our region. And that's something that, as you will see, is not common at all. I had the privilege of going to Guyana on an astronomy trip. We stayed for a couple nights at an Amerindian village out in the Essequibo region. That picture, the boat on the left, it's full of telescopes and equipment. We piled everything into the pirogue and zipped across the lake, and it's beautiful. The night sky there, I would say, is better than the night sky I saw in the Atacama in Chile. It was absolutely stunning. But as you could see with the development, it's all at risk. And there's very, very little actually being done in terms of conservation, while Guyana is very aware of ecological conservation in general and their ecotourism product. Light pollution in particular does not get attention, and we will see that that's a trend as we go along. This is Barbados, and you begin, I think, with this picture, you could see really clearly the problem with light pollution on a small island. You can't escape it. There's nowhere to go. So it's not like you could drive for 2 hours to get to dark skies. That doesn't exist in a lot of these territories. You're stuck there. And as anybody who's been involved in dark sky conservation knows, it's very difficult to roll light pollution back, right? And this is a problem with a lot of these territories. Here's Jamaica, and this is probably the largest island that we would say is in our group. And even on Jamaica, which is the largest island, you would struggle to get out. You can't find blue. These light pollution maps, blue is good, green is in the middle, red is bad. And you'd struggle to get anywhere. That patch of blue on the right-hand side, those are the Blue Mountains, and it's very rough and rugged terrain. So it's very, very difficult. Now here's Grenada. And this is interesting because you would see that the image on the left shows that there's a positive trend. But this is where we get into one of the problems with satellite data. Just to show you how this data could be, good or it could be bad. Grenada had a program where they rolled out LED streetlights. And these satellite data that we use, they're not very sensitive in the wavelengths that these LED streetlights emit. So what are we seeing here in this map? Did Grenada actually have a reduction in light pollution? Or is it that the switch from the sodium vapor to the LED streetlights resulted in the satellite data showing a drop? We don't have actual data. And this is one of the other problems we have. We don't have data for a lot of these territories. So I can't answer that question directly. It may be that the light pollution has actually gone down, but even if somebody were to go there and measure it now, we don't have historical data to compare against. This is Bonaire, and this is technically not part of the English-speaking Caribbean. This is a Dutch territory, so it's part of the Netherlands. But here's an example where conservation can be done and done right, because if you see the northwestern part of Bonaire is the Washington Slagai National Park. And that being a national park is very well protected, very well preserved. There's no developments, even though there's light pollution that's increasing in the developed part of the island. Out on the west, it's fine, and it's desert-like conditions. So if you were to ask me, where's a great place to do astronomy in the Caribbean, it'd be way out there. But because it's undeveloped, there's no services, you're effectively camping, there's no washrooms, the whole jazz with that. But it is an example of how setting up a conservation area could protect dark skies even on just one part of an island. This is St. Vincent. And here I'm going to point out a similar thing where the northern half of the island is relatively dark, but that's because it's a Soufrière volcano, right? The northern half of the island is basically a giant volcano. And so it's very difficult terrain. But if you see the northeastern side, there's some villages all along. But when you look at the light pollution trend map, you will actually see that those villages on the northeastern side is where the majority of the light pollution is increasing. And this is because of development. One of the issues that you're going to see is that the Caribbean is an undeveloped region, right? These are low-income territories. These are small territories. And so there's a lot of development that's taking place, and people want to better themselves and they want to better their lives. And so the irony is the few places that we have that are decent in terms of dark skies are the places that are at prime risk of being lost, especially on these small islands. Just a smattering of islands: St. Lucia, Antigua, Dominica. And again, you could see the challenge. Not only is the light pollution covering the entire islands, but these are small territories. St. Lucia, population 178, Antigua, just 100, Dominica, tens of thousands of people. And these are all separate islands, and getting off of them requires air transportation, international air transportation. And the resources that are available to do any work on these islands is, again, necessarily small. So the way that our grant systems are set up, even to access funding, when you think about potential impacts, you're not going to impact 1 million people using a program on a territory that only has 20,000 people living there. But for those 20,000 people that live there, they are effectively on their own unless there's assistance that comes from outside. And now we come to the real big problem when you're speaking about light pollution and dark sky conservation in the Caribbean. And it's the fact that the Caribbean region is the most homicidal region on the planet. And again, this is something that people might not understand or know unless they're following it. But there's gang violence, there is homicides. The Caribbean islands are a transshipment point for drugs coming out of South America and heading to North America and Europe. And it creates a lot of problems. In fact, if you look at the highest homicide rates in the world, it's dominated by Caribbean islands: Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Lucia, Bahamas, Belize. All of these are Caribbean territories. And so any conversation about light pollution in terms of the people who live in these places is immediately offset by security and safety concerns, where everybody believes that more lighting leads to better security. And it's one of those things you could show people statistics, but you can't change how they feel in their stomach. You can't change how they feel in the core of themselves. And so it's really difficult even to start a conversation about dark sky conservation. And it's one thing to say you're living in a territory where there's geographic separation, right? I mean, you could have a high crime rate in Chicago and still do dark sky conservation, in Arizona, and it's fine. But when you're on these islands and everything is jam-packed together, everything affects everything else. And so these are the challenges. These are the big challenges that we face out here in the Caribbean. I haven't spoken about Trinidad and Tobago, and that's where I'm from. So let me speak a little bit about Trinidad and Tobago. So this is my island. This is Trinidad. Tobago is off to the northeast, but it's off this map. And as you can see, the light pollution is very bad on the western side in particular. There's no way to get out of the green in Trinidad, and you only get the green on the outer edges of the island. Off the east coast, you see big blooms of light pollution, and that's from the oil industry, because Trinidad is a oil-producing country. It's one of the oldest oil-producing countries in the world. When you look at the light pollution trends, we see something interesting. We see a fair set of blue down in the south, but that's because of the decline in oil production and the closure of an oil refinery. All those blue blobs are tied to our energy production and the reduction in energy production over the past 10 years. So none of that is really light pollution conservation work, but the skies are noticeably darker in those areas where that stuff has gone down. The majority of the development, as you can see, is taking place towards the center of the island, and that's clear there. But I want to draw your attention to the northeast corner where there's a little blue blob. This is one of the few blue blobs, areas where light pollution has gone down, where to me it's real. And there's a success story in that little blue blob, and I really want to speak about it. This beach is called Grand Riviere. It's located in the northeast corner of Trinidad and Tobago. And this beach is one of the highest or most dense leatherback turtle nesting sites in the world. Trinidad is the second highest leatherback nesting site in the Western Hemisphere. This beach in particular, these are the little guys over here running across the beach. And you might be surprised to know that on a good night, you could have 400 leatherback turtles on one night on a 1 kilometer stretch of beach. This here is a picture I took. We were out there with our family a few years ago, and you could see the size of these animals. A leatherback turtle is what, 10 feet long, 2,000 pounds. They are massive, right? And I think one of the things you're going to notice clear up is the red lights, right? I have a little video here of the mommy going through her process of laying her eggs and covering up the clutch. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating and it's breathtaking to see these massive animals do their thing. In this community in Trinidad, in the northeast corner, over the past 16, 20 years, there's been massive grassroots community-led conservation efforts to bring these nesting sites back. You will find turtle nesting sites all over the Western Hemisphere on the decline, except over here, because of the community-led efforts, the villages understanding that by preserving the environment, preserving the creatures, preserving the night sky, there's economic benefits to be had, and the entire community got on board. Even to the point where recently they worked with the government and they got turtle-friendly streetlights installed throughout the area. This, to me, shows how strategic alliances between dark sky conservationists and other groups working on the ground could chart a course, even in an environment as challenging as the Caribbean, that something like this could override the security concerns. It could override all of the other impediments. Right now, we're charting another strategic partnership, and this time with indigenous communities in the region. And the indigenous astronomy of the region is not very well known. And our group, Karina, right now is on a push to bring these stories back and to get it front and center. And to that end, we had a wonderful astronomy night at the First Peoples Conference in Trinidad. This was in October. And there were First Peoples tribes from all over the region, including Suriname, Guyana, St. Lucia, Dominica, present. And we spoke about indigenous astronomy and reintroducing, because one of the things we found in our region, at least, is that the oral traditions have been lost. And so we're working to reintroduce the First People astronomical traditions back into the communities. So despite the challenges, we see that there is potentially a way forward. Through working with other organizations, we could create a multifaceted approach, because sometimes just saying astronomy is not good enough to get people to understand the magnitude of the problems that we face. This here is a picture of our star party that we have in the northwest corner of Trinidad, a place called Chagaramas. We host this every year. It's been running for more than 20 years, and we get 500, 600 people spending the night camping and using telescopes and just gazing at the night sky. And it shows that even in a place that has light pollution, there is still wonder to be had viewing the night sky, and people could have a wonderful time. So I think the Caribbean area has unique challenges, and there are a lot of structural issues. The grant system is not set up to favor our region because there are a bunch of small territories. The costs are high. The impacts of light pollution are high because they spread and cover the entire islands. So there are a lot of difficult challenges in terms of doing the dark sky conservation here. But having said that, there are opportunities and avenues available through strategic partnerships. We've seen it with the turtle watching in Trinidad. We've seen it with the First Persons group. We see it with the George Washington Slag Park in Bonaire. And we see the potential in places like Guyana, where there are vast territories of dark skies still available. We just need to have the conservation in place to make sure that the inevitable development doesn't encroach. But I think despite the challenges, there are a lot of people working in these various territories to keep astronomy alive. And I think, in fact, that the future of the skies of the Caribbean may, in fact, be very dark. And I think that's a wonderful thing indeed. So thank you all so very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Isa, for your incredible talk. This was so informative. And you can see that people are also praising you in the chat. I hope you have a lot of fun reading those because it was an amazing talk.
Thank you so very much.
Okay, so before we move on to the next talk, everyone here is a dark sky person, even if you're not a dark sky advocate yet, which I believe everyone at some point does sign up. That is the power of dark sky. I was asked to share something. So in the introduction, I realized I didn't introduce myself very well. I get a little nervous, I get a little jittery, don't talk a lot. But the reason why I'm here today is actually because about 2 years ago, I went to this astronomy conference in Rio. And I saw this talk by this random lady that I'm sure none of you know, named Betty Maya, who said something about saving the night. And her entire presentation was about why light pollution is a bad thing. And I was always interested in astronomy, but I never quite took much thought. I never gave light pollution much thought, to be honest. Then I went to the presentation, and she talked about one of the things that Isa also mentioned, which were the turtles. And I was heartbroken. I was terrified. I was, what do you mean? Like, light pollution isn't just something like that, it's a little annoying, stops me from seeing the sky very well. And she was the one actually who opened my eyes to this entire dark sky thing. And during her presentation, literally in the last 5 minutes, I signed up to be an in dark sky advocate, and I have been bugging her ever since. I started doing research. I in college even. I'm bugging the administration of my school to change our light bulbs because they are really annoying. And if it wasn't for her 2 years ago, I wouldn't be here. So that's I call it my dark sky origin story. And it is something that I hold very dearly now because as someone who hopes to be an astronomer, I now also hope to be someone who fights against light pollution. I feel like that might be now my biggest goal instead of just doing astronomy. So thank you, Betty Maya. I was kidding. I'm sure you all know her. She is amazing. She is one of the people who are responsible for this conference. So send her all a thanks in the chat. She is an incredible person in Dark Sky. Also, a shout out to Chris, who is also amazing and in my chapter now, because I'm no longer in the Rio chapter. Now I'm in Minnesota. Now I'm a Midwestern, I guess. But now that our next speaker is here, I'm gonna introduce him and we'll pass on the mic to him. So, Umberto, can you hear us? Umberto? Okay, so while we wait for Humberto to be able to set up his microphone and his camera, we're gonna move on to our next speaker. So, Bethel, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm great. How about you?
Great, thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm just gonna introduce you and then I'll pass on the mic to you. So
Super.
this is Bethel Bouvier, sorry. I'm trying to pronounce it the way you did. He is an acclaimed landscape astrophotographer from Uruguay, and he's recognized by NASA's Astronomy Picture of the Day multiple times, which is an incredible thing. If you guys don't know what that is, you should definitely look at it. He had an amazing project called Mira las Estrellas, and he documents Uruguay's stargazing landscapes to promote awareness of light pollution. He partnered with the Ministry of Tourism, and FEPO educates others on the importance of night sky preservation. So excited to hear about that. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Mariana, for such a lovely introduction. And thank you, Dark Sky International, for the invitation. I'm truly honored to be here sharing how astrophotography became my form of night sky activism. As many of you know, this is my first time presenting in English, so I hope that my nerves will allow me to express myself clearly. Can you please confirm that my presentation is looking good, not blurry?
Looks good.
Super. So I will keep going. Astronomy became a fascination for me from a very young age. I grew up influenced by my grandfather, an optician with a deep love for astronomy, though he had passed before I was born. His passion found its way through my mother, who would share stories of stargazing sessions with him. She and my father taught me to recognize the popular constellations and, more importantly, to make a habit of looking up. They would point out Orion, the Southern Cross, and could even take my siblings and me out to watch some meteor showers when we were a child. As I grew older, I felt a deep connection to my grandpa through the stars, as though his love for astronomy would come reaching me from beyond. Over time, my love for astronomy grew deeper along with my understanding of the night sky, but it wasn't until my teenage years that I began experimenting with the various instruments my grandfather had left behind. He wasn't just an observer, but also a collector, so I inherited several telescopes, binoculars, and small spotting scopes. Like this, I don't know if you can see, this is called a Halley scope, likely his final purchase, which he used to observe Halley's comets before he passed the following year in the 87. This inheritance fueled my love for astronomy, and having these instruments at hand made the leap to photography and eventually astrophotography feel natural. That's how I began exploring. As many of you know, astrophotography has many approaches, and mine has always been landscape astrophotography. I didn't want to just capture what was happening in the sky, but also I wanted to show the beauty of the landscape below too. And to help you visualize where I am, this is a crop of the map of Latin America with Uruguay standing out. As you can see, we are between Argentina to the west and Brazil to the northeast, and the Atlantic Ocean runs south to east. And if we zoom in even closer to the department of Colonia, and specifically to the city of Colonia El Sacramento, where I live, you can see that we are only 40 kilometers to Buenos Aires, only divided by the widest river in the world. That's no joke. This area was a strategic point in colonial times, as it was the main maritime entrance to the depths of Latin America. Okay? For that reason, Colonia El Sacramento was a very inspiring place for me for my early photography. With its UNESCO-declared historic quarter and the river stretching around, it offered a pretty nice scenery for a travel agent who was starting to play with photography. Yes, at that time I was working as a travel agent in the family business, but not for so long. Sorry, Dad. Little by little, people started noticing my photos on social media, giving mostly nice feedback, and I really felt encouraged to keep pushing myself. Then in 2013, something incredible happened. I took a picture of the moon about to hide the planet Venus, an occultation, and NASA published it as Astronomy Picture of the Day. This is not a picture I'm so proud of. There's really bad editing going on, but it worked as a turning point for me and I think for astrophotography in Uruguay. It was 2013. From that moment, I started to take my astro career a bit more seriously. For the first time, an astronomy picture taken in Uruguay had international exposure. The first Uruguayan photographer was highlighted by NASA, and all of this was massively reported in the local media. My community of followers skyrocketed, and especially that of astronomy enthusiasts, naturally. After that recognition, I realized I couldn't go back. I knew photography was my calling, so I made a leap of faith and I quit my job as a travel agent to become a freelance photographer, with the aim of dedicating full-time to astrophotography over time. For some years, I was making a living out of commercial photography, some landscape photography, but to be honest, for years, I wasn't even close of making a living out of astrophotography. At that time, it was such a small niche here in Uruguay, but somehow I managed to explore my country in search of some good dark sky locations and stargazing spots. So I came up with this idea of, well, the Ministry of Education and Culture here has bursaries for artistic projects, and photography is one of the categories one can apply. So I came up with this idea of creating a Uruguay astro location map and catalog that would serve as inspiration for other star gazers seeking for inspiration on how to get there. And of course, the way of communicating all of this would be through awe-inspiring images of Uruguay under the night sky. Photos never seen before here. Uruguay is a small country of 3 million people, and half of our population lives in the capital. You can see Montevideo here in a light pollution map to the south. So we have lots of dark sky spots in the countryside, but the thing is that we don't have many national parks. So it was needed a catalog of those places to be available for stargazers. After some planning and putting together the idea, I finally applied for the bursary in 2017. I was convinced that this was a great and original idea that many people would feel connected with. But after some months, I received an email from the reviewers only to hear, unfortunately, that it was rejected. I said, well, okay, let's take the opportunity to improve the project, review the locations, the criteria, and hey, my second NASA astronomy picture of the day was just published. It was this photo of a partial solar eclipse going on above the skyline of Buenos Aires, taken from Colonia del Sacramento. So my curriculum was a bit stronger, and I applied again in 2018, but again, it was rejected. It was hard to face those rejections, I must say, but I wasn't ready to give up just yet. So I asked a fellow photographer who has been granted the bursary before to please review my application. And she gave me some invaluable advice. She said, Fefo, I know this project comes from a good place, but you're presenting it as it's mainly for your career. Let the reviewers see how it benefits the whole community, the community of astronomy lovers, photographers, and nature enthusiasts. So I made improvements, strengthened my application, and tried again. Finally, in 2019, the stars aligned, and the Ministry of Education and Culture of Uruguay granted me the bursary to start. Mirá las estrellas, look at the stars in English, felt like the perfect name because it's an invitation, almost a call to action, right? With this bursary, I finally had the chance to create a resource for stargazers all over Uruguay, just as I had dreamed. For the following 2 years, Look at the Stars grew as a list of stargazing spots in Uruguay with the aim of showing another side of Uruguayan natural landscape through astrophotography, creating first-hand information for those planning astronomical observations or photographic outings, raising awareness of the impact of light pollution on ecosystems and the need to keep these sites free of light pollution, and also raising awareness of the benefits of stargazing itself and encouraging people to observe the sky more often. All that under this criteria, that the sites were rated 4 to 1 on the world scale, bottle dark sky scale. I know that it wasn't the best way to do it, but at that time I didn't have any professional measurements for the sky, any instruments. So the bottle scale gave me a basis for that to start with. Another criteria is the predominance of natural scenery, the ease of access to the site, and very important, the safety of spending time there, spending the night especially. In particular, sites that deserve attention for their natural, cultural, or archaeological value would be prioritized. From the very beginning, the response to the project was beyond expectations for me. A public relations firm in Montevideo saw the potential in the project and offered to be sponsors and help to the project reach a larger audience through the media. So suddenly I had the opportunity to embark on a press tour to communicate what it was all about on the main TV channels in Uruguay. And at the same time, the main national newspapers echoed the news. Before long, EFE, an international press agency, picked up the story, and Uruguay finally had an international profile when it comes to dark skies. Look at the Stars not only highlighted Uruguay's natural landscapes and heritage under the night sky, but also ignited a national dialogue about light pollution's impact on ecosystems, emphasizing why these sites need protection. It inspired many to see stargazing as part of the Uruguayan identity. At that point, I reached out and became an advocate for dark sky. It was Betty Maya, the one who introduced me, and they would publish an amazing article that Megan Eves, also an Dark Sky magazine editor, and I'm happy to say she's now my friend, could put together from an interview with me about the Look at the Stars initiative. With the response exceeding all expectations, I wanted to create a public experience to bring these images closer to the people of Uruguay. So in collaboration with the Montevideo Planetarium, I held an exhibition under the same name. Here's the Montevideo Planetarium the night of the exhibition opening. Thousands of people attended not only to the opening, but during the following months. And naturally, many primary school children could see the pictures when assisted to planetarium activities. Seeing the wonder in their eyes, it was so good for my soul. They are the future of night sky advocacy, and that made me really happy. This exhibit symbolically closed the project, but opened a doorway for new conversations. I believe that captivating images like this were key for this story, this initiative, to be shared on such a big scale. Now, talking about things that helped this movement grow, I think the pandemic played a key role in tourism stakeholders looking for sustainable, friendly, and different tourism alternatives, and astrotourism started to gain momentum in Uruguay. In a way, Look at the Stars set a precedent at the national level and raised awareness of the idea that astrotourism was a possibility in the country. Proof of this is that the Ministry of Tourism began to offer courses to tour operators to train them in areas such as basic astronomy, light pollution prevention, astrophotography, meteorology, and planning of astrotourism proposals. The curious thing is that I was not invited to be part of the teaching team, and the fact that they chose a Chilean astrophotographer left me a bit irritated, but that's another story. Later, the Ministry of Tourism will hire me to create a customized catalog of nightscapes to present Uruguayan astrotourism in international trade fairs, and I even authored some articles on astrotourism for the country brand websites. After a couple of years, it was tangible that this pioneering project contributed for the night sky to be considered on many levels, starting with education in astrophotography, followed by astrotourism, and finally, and what seems the most important to me personally, and probably to you too, a basis for different actors to start moving towards the protection of the natural night. Over the past 2 years, astronomers, together with public stakeholders, have been working to establish public lighting policies to reduce light pollution in the capital, Montevideo, and in Canelones, Uruguay's second most densely populated department. Archaeologists and researchers are investigating the link between the region's original inhabitants and the night sky, discovering that this history of astronomy here is much older and richer than we thought before. Cabo Polonio, a unique ocean town in eastern Uruguay, has remained charmingly without streetlights, thanks to its residents who prevented a power line from being laid across the town. It remains one of the country's most attractive astrotourism spots. But when it comes to protecting the night through certified methods, Uruguay had not taken the step until this year. Something that has all of us who seek to protect the night very excited is that the necessary records and studies are being held and carried out to declare a nature reserve in the department of Rocha as the first dark sky reserve to apply for that dark sky international certification. This application is led by astronomer Andrea Sosa and her team, including environmental management graduate Florencia Reichmann. She's dark skies delegate for Uruguay. The reserve is called Cerro Negro, Black Hill in English, and is part of AMBA, a non-profit organization that aims to restore the emotional link between humans and nature and to regenerate ecosystems. I am honored to be part of this research team and to contribute from astrophotography so that this project will be the precedent for many more dark sky reserves, not only in Uruguay, but also throughout Latin America, and so that it will be a message of hope in the fight to protect the night. Today, as different stakeholders move towards light pollution policies in our cities, and with Uruguay's potential first dark sky reserve preparing to apply for certification, I'm more inspired than ever to continue this journey. Together, I believe that we can protect the stars for generations to come. I would like to invite you all that want to connect with me and perhaps visit Uruguay someday, especially the astrophotographers out there, to please reach out and send me a line. Here are my contact details, my email, Instagram, website, which is not only in Spanish, but also in English. You can see more about the Mira las Estrellas projects, see some more of my work, get some prints if you want. Well, I hope this story inspired you in some way, that my English was clear, that the presentation ran smooth. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of the conference. Ciao.
Thank you so much, Bippo. This was amazing. It was an incredible presentation. And your English is amazing. Don't even worry.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all these incredible things with us. It was just amazing. Every time I always have to rewatch the presentations because it's so much information and it's so cool. And it's just congratulations. Now
Thank you very much.
we're gonna move on to our next speaker. So Humberto Garcia Montano is a physicist and environmental management expert from Nicaragua. He studies light pollution in urban areas, focusing on its environmental impact in Managua. And his work aims to increase awareness of artificial lighting. So amazing. I will say though, Humberto will be speaking in Spanish. So if you could please turn on if everyone who doesn't speak Spanish, please turn on the captioning. It's located in the toolbar underneath in the bottom of your webinar screen. Yeah.
Ok.
Humberto,
Buenos días, ¿se escucha?
Sí, puedes empezar.
Ok. Buenos días. Mi nombre es Humberto García. Trabajo en astronomía. Aquí tenemos un observatorio astronómico en Nicaragua, en Managua, en la capital. Yo hice un estudio, como estudié gestión ambiental, mi maestría, entonces hice un estudio de la contaminación lumínica. Bueno, la idea era, como soy de formación de físico, entonces quería tener un tema que me relacionara la astronomía con la física y la gestión ambiental. Entonces, qué mejor tema fue que la contaminación lumínica. Esa fue mi tesis de la maestría, y con ese hice un artículo, pues el que está publicado, ¿verdad? Y lo tienen ahí, está en algunos repositorios de academia y otras. Entonces, bueno, la idea era evaluar la contaminación lumínica, cómo ha ido evolucionando en la capital, ya, porque nos interesa por el observatorio que tenemos, que está dentro de la capital, ¿verdad? Pero estamos un poquito en la afuera, en la parte más oscura. Entonces hice un estudio de la contaminación lumínica, no, desde 1995 a 2022. Pretendo continuarlo, ¿verdad? Ahorita solo lo hice para Managua y una parte, ¿verdad? Porque, bueno, lo hice midiendo con los fotómetros que hay, los manuales, los pequeños, lo tengo allá por allá. Bueno, y usé los satélites, de estos que observan nocturnamente. Entonces me revelaron los datos y con eso pude hacer un mapa, ¿no? De la contaminación lumínica, cómo ha ido evolucionando, pues con la diferente, también la Managua, ¿verdad? Como capital se ha ido expandiendo, entonces eso ha ido creciendo la contaminación, ¿no? Por las carreteras y todo eso, pues la urbanización es lo que trae. Entonces, en eso me basé mi investigación. También evalué cómo estaban las luminarias en su momento, ¿verdad? Entonces, también salió otro artículo, ¿verdad? Cuando estaba en la maestría, hice el primer artículo, que era una parte de mi investigación, era ver qué es lo que está ayudando a la contaminación. Entonces, muchas lámparas pues están mal diseñadas, mal puestas, ¿verdad? Entonces ese fue lo primero. Después ya medir en situ y con satélite, ¿verdad? Lo hice de las dos formas para ver el grado de contaminación pues que ha ido evolucionando en Nicaragua, en Managua, ¿verdad? Y también tengo los datos para las otras regiones de Nicaragua, que el próximo artículo que voy a hacer, pues donde ya voy a tener todas las principales ciudades de Nicaragua. Entonces, este es el próximo artículo que voy a hacer para ver cómo ha evolucionado, pues en los últimos años este problema que tenemos, la contaminación, ¿verdad? Lumínica. También estoy tratando de buscar estudiantes de medicina que le guste esa parte, pues para evaluar la parte de cómo afecta a la salud humana, ¿no? Porque hay gente ahí que tiene problemas pues para dormir, entonces la idea es hacer ese tipo de estudio, ya que lo hagan los médicos, pues. Este, y ver pues cuál es, ya, entonces verla, pues cómo afecta a la salud humana, ¿no? Entonces, pero bueno, ahí cuando me salga un estudiante de medicina, pues quiere hacer su tesis en esa parte, ¿no? También con los de optometría, ¿no? He hecho una investigación, pero está diseñada en la parte más que todo con la radiación ultravioleta y cómo afecta la vista, ¿no? En esa parte. Que eh, fui cotutor de esa tesis. Ya, entonces, la idea es seguir estos estudios, pues, para ver cómo crece la contaminación, porque a veces nosotros observábamos, ¿no? Aquí en la capital hace muchos años todavía se observaban lechuzas, ¿verdad? Algunos animales nocturnos, pues ahora con lo que se ha extendido la ciudad, pues ya no se ven este tipo de animales, ¿ya? Se observan algunos en la noche también, algunos tipos de animales, pues ahora son muy escasos, pues debido a este problema de contaminación ha crecido, ¿verdad? También el estudio, pues la idea es como el gobierno, pues, quitó todas las que son las lámparas de neón, todas las lámparas que eran contaminantes de mercurio y todo eso, pues sustituyeron las LED, ¿verdad? Por LED, pues que ahora es lo que se está construyendo. Entonces la idea pues ahora es volver a medir, ¿verdad? Porque ahora tenemos las LED, ¿eh? Entonces, y ver pues cómo evaluar de nuevo toda la parte de la contaminación, pero ya con LED, ¿ya? Porque el gobierno ha sustituido todas las lámparas esas que les decía, eh, de mercurio antigua y ha puesto LED. Entonces, hacer de nuevo el estudio para ver si la contaminación pues se ha mantenido o ha ido creciendo con las LED ahora porque son luces blancas, pero también hay que evaluar el pavimento si ese reflejo es muy fuerte, ¿no? Y ese puede ser uno de los contaminantes. Ya, entonces, aunque las LED son más fácil de edificar, ¿verdad? No es como la lámpara de mercurio que irradiaba a todos lados, pues esa es la ventaja de la LED que está de viaje inclinada. Entonces, más o menos eso es lo que hago, pues en la parte de como observatorio astronómico, ¿no? Y en un futuro, pues, si alguien te interesa algún abogado, puede hacer o proponer una pequeña ley porque en Nicaragua no tenemos nada de leyes de contaminación lumínica, ya que es un tema nuevo, ¿ya? O no se pone atención, ¿verdad? Solo está en la cantidad de lux que debe el flujo, ¿verdad? Luminoso que debe tener algún anuncio y esas cosas. Entonces la idea es también pues en el futuro que se haga una ley, ya porque tenemos una ley para el ruido, entonces la idea es hacer una ley para la parte de contaminación. Entonces, bueno, antes éramos observatorio, ahora somos un centro de investigación de astrofísica y ciencias espaciales, entonces cuando lo hice era observatorio, ¿no? El artículo que ya tiene a unos años, ¿ya? Entonces, la idea es seguir estudiando por la parte de astronomía que nos interesa porque queremos ver, pues, cómo me afecta la observación de la estrella, ¿verdad? Para los estudios de astrofísica. Bueno, eso más que todo les quería platicar, ¿verdad? Gracias por la oportunidad.
Muchas gracias, Humberto, por la su presentación. Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the Q&A section. We're also running pretty good in time, so I'd like to bring the three speakers and see what questions the audience have for you. Okay, so you can see, okay, I have a question for Issa. Could being smaller contains nations be an opportunity to innovate with lighting? I saw a presentation by a representative of the Barbados government where they are installing motion sensing roadway lighting. What would you think would be needed to have a Caribbean nation adopt dark sky lighting?
Yeah, that's interesting. Being smaller territories is a double-edged sword. Because the territories are smaller, it means that doing anything positive, it's easier to do something that covers an entire territory than if the place was huge. So it is a double-edged sword. I think the problem is right now the priorities of these countries are not in a position where dark sky conservation is at the front of the list, and that's what's challenging. So you're not going to get a big national rollout on something just for dark sky conservation. It's certainly possible. It's just a matter of the resources and the will and inclination of the people in these countries to do that. Because, like I said, these are small developing countries and very low income countries, and people sometimes have other priorities, and that's the challenge with doing something big like that. Like in terms of, is that the best use of the resources of the country right now? and you're going to get that sort of challenge from people. But it is certainly possible. It's just whether it's likely to happen now.
That was a great answer. Thank you for sharing, Lisa. I see some other questions in the chat. If you guys have any more questions, please make sure to send it through the Q&A box. We have a good amount of time and we have many interesting topics to talk about. So feel free to ask your questions. Can be not necessarily about what they said in the presentation. Maybe you're curious to know what's their favorite dark sky moment. That would be a great question. So I do see a question in the chat, which is, are there countries where light pollution is captured and lost? Thus, apart from conversation in national parks. This wasn't necessarily directed to anyone. So if any of the two of you would like to answer, feel free to.
Yeah, I mean, this is what part of Dark Sky International is about, right? To reach laws at a government level in order to start like protecting our cities from light pollution. So definitely there are many countries that are already applying laws to protect the night sky.
Interesting. I was wondering if like there are anyone, but not really. I wasn't really sure. I'm sure that Imai or Chris might know. So if you guys want to tune in the chat, that would be really interesting to know. But okay, let's move on to our next question. Someone asked, Nancy asked, sorry, how do we measure light pollution worldwide if the satellite's measurements are missing the blue spot?
Yeah, I don't think that I'm the correct person to answer that, only to provide my sort of opinion or perspective. It's difficult. I believe that there are satellites that are soon to be operational or operational that are more sensitive to that part of the spectrum. But I think all of the existing data we have are from the VIIRS instrument, which is not sensitive. So our current satellite data is missing a big chunk of the spectrum, and it's a problem. But hopefully, with new satellites coming on stream, we will have data that is, that fills that gap. The problem is that we won't have good historical data to compare it against. But right now, that's a gap.
Interesting. Do you have anything to say, Lisa?
No?
Okay, perfect. Thank you for answering, Isa. Now we have a question directed to both Isa and Finn. So what's the favorite night sky objects that you would like to observe again and again?
Wow, that's a difficult one. I think I have several, but the ever-changing moon, I think, is my favorite personal. Yeah, I really like how with each day the moon changes so much, and we have so many different phases we can capture, from the Cinderella light moon to the full moon and the craters when there's a crescent moon. It's very like ever changing, and depending on where the moon is, if it's up in the sky or if it's towards the horizon, you can see different images from it, and different photos come from that perspective. So the moon, I think, for me is my personal favorites.
And I guess for me, there's a little star cluster way down in the southern hemisphere, close to the Southern Cross, called the Jewel Box cluster. And for anybody that has access to southern skies and who likes to look through telescopes, it's not the biggest, fanciest, most in-your-face thing, but it is just beautiful because the stars in it are different colors and they have that contrast in it. Stereotypical to say, but it looks like a box of jewels. And it's one of those little things that whenever it's there, I just go back to. Makes me happy.
And adding to that southern hemisphere objects, the Magellanic clouds, two little looking like clouds, galaxies you can see with the naked eye here in the southern hemisphere. It's like sort of, for me, a measurement of the light pollution of the area, because if I can see them with the naked eye, I know I'm in a very dark location. So if you haven't seen it, if you ever have the chance to travel to a South American or any other part of the South country, you can try spot them in a dark location with your naked eye, and that's pretty fascinating for someone that haven't seen it before.
Great answer, guys. Thank you. This actually reminded me of one of the things that have been most emblematic to me about moving to the US from Brazil. That my favorite thing to observe has always been Orion, especially the three stars in Orion's belt, because that was like a story my mom used to tell me when I was a kid about the three Marys and everything. And then I got to the US, and the sky here across is so much clearer than it was in Rio, because it's, well, Northfield, it's a very tiny town. But I can't really see Orion because it's unless it's like very late at night. So during the time when I'm awake, when I first got here, I kept looking for it. I'm like, I know it's not gonna be here, but I'm still a little sad about it. And now I just look at the Pleiades a lot. That is a personal favorite of mine. It looks like to me, it looks like a fairy that's swiftly. I don't know how to explain that. Hey, now I have a question for Humberto, and I will first of all like to apologize for my very broken Spanish. I have not spoken Spanish in many years. So, Humberto, una pregunta para ti. ¿Se han realizado estudios sobre los desplazamientos de los búhos y creatures nocturnas fuera de la ciudad y a dónde les llevan estos patrones? I don't know if I was understandable, therefore please correct me
Yes,
if you understood what
very
I
good.
said.
Yeah.
Humberto.
Sí. Bueno, saliendo de la ciudad uno puede ver la Vía Láctea. Pues Managua lógicamente no se puede ver. Que es que no miré bien, no entendí bien la pregunta porque estaba entrecortada. Ya. Sí, no me acuerdo, es que no, como no tengo la computadora donde tengo la presentación, estoy con el teléfono. Entonces, yo tengo los datos del satélite militar de Estados Unidos, que fue el que me regalaron los datos. Entonces tengo para todas las ciudades de Nicaragua, los principales. Entonces la idea es hacer ese estudio para ver también cómo ha habido el grado de contaminación en las ciudades, ya que no es la capital también. No sé si esa era la pregunta porque se entrecortó.
Yes, I see that's.
Sí, este fue el que usé. Sí, este fue el Sky Quality Meter, el que usé in situ, andar por toda la capital en la noche haciendo las mediciones y con el satélite para corroborar los datos. Entonces salieron diferencias muy pequeñas.
I don't know if I need to do translation for him.
Don't worry, there's like captioning, a live captioning.
Okay.
Thank you. Muchas
Sí, es
gracias.
que estoy viendo los subtítulos. Ok, sí, por ejemplo, con el Sky Quality me dio, que me acuerdo el dato, en promedio 16.61 y con el satélite me dio 16.95, o sea que fue diferencia en decimales. El promedio, pues, de toda la ciudad. Pero hay lugares que lógicamente son más oscuros que otros. Pues la universidad, la UNAM Managua, donde yo trabajo, donde está nuestro observatorio, está en la parte más oscura de la capital. Esa es una ventaja tener el observatorio. No estamos estrictamente en el centro de la ciudad.
Gracias. We have another question. I think this question is from Isa. So my question is, what were the key stakeholders to keep drive the turtle light pollution reduction movement? Was it youth, particular leaders? How did you identify key stakeholders?
Yeah, in the case with the turtle watching in Trinidad, you know, it started as protecting turtles from poaching. So there were people who would actually slaughter the animals as they came up on the beach or try to get their eggs or to cut their fins. And the conservation movement started to protect turtles. So it was volunteers who would patrol the beaches just to chase away poachers who would try to kill the animals. And that's how it started. And it was to fund their work, because they were just volunteers, that they started doing tours. So they then started inviting everybody to come down, and they will organize tours. You pay a fee and they will take you out with their equipment and give you a full tour of what was going on the beach. And that actually raised funds for their conservation efforts in terms of keeping animals. And then it grew from that to the overall starting, if they're doing tours, what are the correct ways to do it without hurting the animals? And that's where the red lights came in. And then it expanded to the villages surrounding the beaches. So it grew organically, and only now have hotels come on board. So there's the Hardcore Group in Trinidad, which is a hotel on one of those beaches. And because they recognize the interest now, they're putting money into it. And that's how they got the street lights, by working in conjunction with the government. So that's the sort of the history of how that happened. It was very organic. It was community led, and it started with patrolling the beaches, and it's ended up where now we have corporations like these hotels working with the government to get streetlights installed. It really had nothing to do with the astronomy community at all. It was really entirely on the conservation side.
Amazing. Thank you, Lisa. Now we have a question for Fiffle. Someone said that they love your pairing of earthbound landscapes with the night sky, and asked you to discuss your inspiration and techniques for doing that.
Okay, yeah. As I said, I never felt like doing photography just of astronomical objects, like, for example, a galaxy, only a galaxy, or just the moon, or just the Milky Way. I always feel like drawn to having some Earth elements on it. I think that started because my first photographs were about planetary conjunctions between the moon and the planets that will mostly happen just above the horizon. And as I live by the river, and I could see those planetary conjunctions above the river, so that was kind of my first images, twilight images, and most of them were single shots. Over time, when I started with more astrophotography and the Milky Way and very dark locations, I felt the need to start like improving my technique. Sometimes I would take a picture of like a long exposure of the landscape first, and immediately after I would take another of the sky with a star tracker, because a star tracker would allow me to take a longer exposure and having the stars like dots and not just not a trail, right? So the technique is a blend of most astrophotographers now are a blend of two photos, one for the landscape and one for the sky. That's how I'm doing it right now.
Thank you, Fiffle. I was actually gonna ask you something. Can you please translate something to Humberto? I think that's gonna be a better strategy than me using my broken Spanish
Sure,
to try and say something. So
is it the question there in the
yes,
Q&A
someone asked to clarify.
from Leticia?
Leticia and Admin.
Ok, Leticia, Humberto, Leticia pregunta, dice que la pregunta fue ¿dónde se fueron los animales nocturnos ya que no se ven en Nicaragua?
Bueno, bueno, ahí tengo que buscar a alguien que estudie biología o zoología, ¿verdad? Para ver hacia dónde han emigrado los animales. No, no sé porque no eché el estudio, ¿verdad? Pero como nosotros estamos en la parte más oscura de la capital, entonces está una pequeña reserva. Entonces, también ha crecido muchas urbanizaciones alrededor de la ciudad. Entonces, ese es un problema que hay que identificar dónde están estos animales, lechuza, murciélago y todos estos animalitos que vivían en la parte nocturna. ¿Ya? Entonces, tendría que hacer el estudio para ver a dónde se fueron, ¿no? Yo no he hecho el estudio porque no soy especialista en zoología ni en biología. Soy físico, pues, pero bueno.
Muchas gracias, Roberto. And gracias, Pepo, for translating.
Pleasure.
Okay, so we have many questions. I'm trying to do a bit of
There's-
this, a bit of that. Go ahead.
There's one about, now I lost it, but someone asks about studies about mental health and light pollution. I don't have any particular research about that comes to my mind, but I have a link to one that I will type in the chat that has been like fundamental for me. It's about how the night sky produces a sense of awe and inspire us to reach for something larger and not just think about us and think of a greater benefit for humanity. So it's a very long study and research, very scientific. I will type the link here so you can all check it out and get its benefits.
Thank you, Pepo. It's amazing. I know there have been some studies done about neurodevelopment and things related to that. I am pretty sure I might have an article about mental health saved somewhere. I can check and try to link that here in a bit. But someone asked, living in Chicago, there is extreme light pollution, and you are right. People equate light with safety. How can we go about changing that concept?
Yeah, so there actually is an answer to that, and that is, what we need is not we need effective lighting, right? So even for security purposes, the light needs to be on the ground. It needs to be low. It doesn't need to be up in the sky. So you could have both by controlling your lighting, by using the full cutoff fixtures, by spotlighting certain areas, and it also allows you to light the same area using lower wattage, so you're saving energy. So when you're dealing with security, you can't. I don't personally think it's effective to pull out statistics showing that lighting doesn't make people safer, right? I don't think that that's an effective way to go about doing it, even though statistics might exist. I don't think it's effective because you're not connecting with people and their problems, right? So rather than fight it from that angle, you take it from the angle that, yeah, sure, let's light the area, but let's make sure that we control the lighting and it's pointing downwards and it's safe for animals and it's better for people and it's not being wasted going up into the sky where it's not helping you be more safe, but it's hurting all the animals out there and the sky and everything else.
Okay, thank you so much, Rita. Another question that is I think it's for Ethan. Has any territory with the region considered obtaining dark sky international certification purely for astrodrones?
I'm not aware of it, but I don't think I'm the correct person to answer that. Maybe somebody from Dark Sky might know better if anybody has approached them. but I'm personally not aware of it, at least not in the English-speaking Caribbean. Maybe some of the Spanish territories might have, but I'm not aware of it.
If any their Skype persons could type it up in the chat if you have any information about it. Feel free to share. And then a general question, not sure who this is aimed for, but does light pollution impact the quality and accuracy of satellite images as well? If yes, then what measures can be taken to mitigate this effects?
I'm not in the position to answer to that question.
Yeah, I don't think I'm really in a position to answer that question either. If light pollution affects satellite data, and I don't know. There are certain things that it might affect, but I'm really not in a position to say.
That's fair. I would also not be.
Tal vez tiene que ver con la pregunta que con los satélites de Helios, ¿no? Que ahora tienen los trencitos, que en astronomía pues, está afectando un poquito. Pues si está en la dirección, uno está observando, está haciendo su estudio en astronomía, pues han registrado cuando pasa el trencito, ¿verdad? De los satélites que tiene SpaceX. Ya, entonces, que son de comunicación, entonces, pero realmente por el campo que uno estudia, ¿verdad? Es difícil que un satélite se le pase a uno ahí sobre la imagen, pues, pero eso más que todo sucede con los grandes observatorios, porque tienen cámaras de campo más grandes. La de nosotros es muy, muy chiquita el campo, ¿verdad? Y es difícil que pase ahí un satélite. Sí. Pero hay una creciente por los astrónomos que están muy preocupados porque se cree que si esta compañía está poniendo estos satélites, hay otras que van a poner, entonces, para que la comunicación internet sea satelital. Entonces, creo que China tiene un proyecto también de estos satélites, entonces, a medida que vayan más satélites, pues vamos a tener ese inconveniente a la hora de hacer los estudios de astrofísica. Entonces también eso, recuerden que eso trae basura espacial, entonces, porque esos satélites que ya no sirven, pues se van a destruir, ¿no? Algún momento y se han visto que han caído, ¿no?
Yes, as Humberto said, we don't know if light pollution is affecting satellite imagery and research, but we for sure know that satellites are impacting in astronomy research from Earth, because there are too much satellites and the light they reflect from the sun is interfering with observations, radio telescopes, and even for astrophotography, it's been a big change. For example, when I started doing astrophotography, I could make a time lapse, and for example, a time lapse of 100 images would require for me to edit just 10 images that will have satellites to remove them. Now, if I want to do the same, I will have to remove at least 3 or 4 satellites from each frame of each photo, right? So the amount of satellites that we have in the sky year by year is just growing, and that's alarming astronomers at first hand, but also astrophotographers as well.
Muchas gracias, Humberto. Thank you very much, Ethel. I almost switched into Portuguese. Too many languages in my head right now. So we still have time for a couple more questions, and someone actually asked something about astrophotography, so I think this is aimed towards Ethel. But everyone feel free to tune in. They asked, what simple astrophotography activity / event could they do with youth and or the public?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
Yes. They are asking what simple astrophotography activity they could do with youth and or the public. The context is they work with outreach education, and they want to do an event for the community to talk about the importance of dark sky.
Okay, if I understood understood well, you want like an example of an activity you can do with astrophotography to help outreach with people about light pollution, right? That's the question.
From what I interpret, yes, I think that's
Okay.
what I want to know.
Well, let me think, but I'm thinking about, for example, because cell phones now have the technology to capture, for example, the Milky Way, or at least a lot of stars. Now, if you hold a phone from a tripod, right? So a simple practice and research would be take one photograph inside the city, see what it comes from, and then take another picture and see what happens when you are out of the city pointing to the sky, and compare those two images, trying to have, if the cell phone has a manual exposure, trying to have the same settings for the image. Sorry, I don't know if that's the best advice I can give, but that's what it comes to my mind now.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm also gonna say the cell phones are a good idea, and these new cell phones that could do like 10-second exposures, they could do a really good job of capturing stars in the Milky Way. You just rest it on the floor, point it straight up, and have it exposed, and you could get really great from a dark side. You could get really good Milky Way pictures with just your cell phone, and I think that's out of the gates a really easy way to engage kids. A lot of the times they want to do this stuff with their own device, right? They don't
Right.
want to use somebody else's thing. So anything that you could do with their own phone, it makes a big difference to them, you know.
Yes.
thank you so much to the both of you for answering to this question. As we're reaching the end of this panel, I would like to just ask you to see if you have any final thoughts, any final things you want to share.
I just want to say thank you. I read such lovely comments in the chat section. I'm so honored to be here, to be part of this presentation, and to meeting Isa, Humberto, you, Mariana. It was a pleasure. So thank you, and let's keep fighting for the stars.
Yeah, along the same lines, it's a total pleasure to be here. Thanks to Dark Sky, and I know it's been mentioned before, but Betty Maya is the reason that I'm here as well. So a big shout out to her, wonderful person, and all the folks at Dark Sky. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conference. I've been listening to several of the sessions, and it's really good work that you guys are doing here. I'm really happy to be part of it. So thank you also very much.
Bueno, gracias a todos, a Mariana y a ustedes. Un placer haberlos conocido. Y sí, también es un derecho según las Naciones Unidas a tener cielo oscuro. Entonces eso hay que impulsarlo, ¿verdad? Un derecho como civilización que tenemos, ¿verdad? Que las luminarias se pongan, pero como dijo él, ¿verdad? Que iluminen realmente lo que sería por donde va la persona, no hacia las casas, ¿verdad? Entonces, un derecho que la ONU lo tiene, que tenemos derecho a cielo oscuro, entonces hay que seguir luchando y haciendo ese tipo de experimentos con los celulares para hacer concientizar a nuestros gobernantes, ¿verdad? Y a las autoridades para que cuando se tomen las mejores decisiones, cuando pongan anuncios a luminarios, pongan algún cartel, ¿verdad? Entonces, para que se tomen las medidas. Sería muy bueno. Gracias a todos, ¿no?
Gracias, Humberto. Thank you all so much for coming. This was amazing. All the speakers were amazing. I learned so much from this. As always, this continues to be my favorite dark sky moment of the year. I love this conference. It's always so fun to get to see everyone interacting, everyone collaborating in the chat. All of a sudden, you find people who are maybe 30 minutes away from you and you might have never known about it wasn't for this. So thank you so much. We have a workshop in about 15 minutes about policy engagement. So please tune into that. All the links are in your attendee hub. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in and chatting with us. I hope you guys have a great rest of the conference.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Gracias, adiós, cuídense.